I could do, what if we just did like Welcome to Start Garden?
Welcome to Start Garden.
Well, I was...
Like that?
Yeah.
Okay. Or you want to say it at the same time? On 3. 1, 2,
2, 3.
Welcome to Start Garden. That sounds like a...
We're here talking about entrepreneur ecosystem development. I'm Paul Moore. I'm a director at Start Garden.
I'm Daryl Ross, co-director here at Start Garden.
Yeah. So we are doing this because ecosystem development is an emerging field in the world of economic development.
And we think we just have some important things to say.
Yeah. So if you're listening, thanks.
Continue to do so.
So let's talk about ecosystem building, entrepreneurial ecosystem building, looking at things through a systems level versus looking at things through a programmatic level, looking at economic development practices historically versus this emerging field, what we believe is an emerging field in economic development called ecosystem building, otherwise called entrepreneur-led economic development, otherwise just known as somebody is paying attention to the system as a whole. Parts. And today is actually the day after Valentine's Day, 2019, and it is less than 24 hours since Amazon announced that they are pulling their HQ out of New York, which I love how they always refer to it as Long Island City, Queens. Right. Which is kind of a way of not saying New York.
So what did Amazon do wrong, or what did they do right?
Okay. Well,
or is it wrong or right?
Well, and I think first of all, the number one thing that popped up for me was this: is how
they got data from across the country for free. That's pretty.
But no, the 25,000 jobs became the whole country went bananas. That was like the economic development brass ring is grab 25,000 jobs as a politician for you to be able to say we added 25,000 jobs in a snap.
Definitely an old school lens of economic development. If this was 10 years ago and people really fell for the jobs added and you can quantify it. But I think in the days where people know 25,000 underpaying, low performance jobs that are going to gentrify communities, it takes a different lens. I mean,
or 25,000 ridiculously high paying tech jobs that are going to completely drive out. So I think the short way of saying it, I heard this. I heard somebody saying Amazon keeps talking about its 70% of New Yorkers were behind Amazon HQ project. Except for the 30% that live in Queens and Long Island.
Imagine that. But again, and just a stereotype, you probably have an historically minded economic development director, a municipality who feels
they thought they were doing everything
who are still measuring growth as jobs. Not even say added, right? Jobs promised, because if you break down those 25,000, I think that trickles in over a decade. And that warrants tax cuts. You have Google and Apple, who have already invested heavily into that same area without tax cuts, and they're doing it more quiet. But again, I think it raises, at least through our lens, the importance of looking at ecosystem development versus just economic development. Because from a pure economic development lens, this would have been considered a home run 10 years ago. When you look at ecosystem development and what is it going to do to other entrepreneurs, how is it going to affect the quality of life of residents, and how is it going to affect other sectors and so forth? I just think, quite candidly, they got it wrong, and they just never looked at it.
And
they just assumed that, again,
a fundamental of ecosystem development is how are you home growing your businesses? How are you home growing your economy? How are you making the lives that exist already in your city better, the businesses that already exist in the city more competitive, the desire to be in your city greater based on what's happening there, not based on we were able to grab this massive company from here, bring it here, and now we're going to get all these other people coming in, and with their vans and their wagons and their oxen. And I think that's where it's interesting to see a community now pushing back. And they didn't say we want to push back and we want to see homegrown economic development. I mean, that's where more like we're talking about ecosystems. But I think what they said is they finally said we are awake to the idea that although this might be a win at City Hall, this is a disaster.
Well, again, you said that like the 30% of people who are against it, or I joked about all the data they got from around the countries. But let's be honest, when these cities were quote unquote competing for Amazon to relocate to their community, I'm almost guessing they never reached out to the community and the entrepreneurial community and so forth and said, you know, what do you see this looking like? Why would we want Amazon here? How can it benefit you? What are some synergies we can create by adding it? Yeah. It was totally a top-down approach of jobs added, which we can get into that later, why that's the worst indicator of economic development anyway. And again, this Amazon today just shows that you really have to look at the whole ecosystem and before you can make these type of decisions. Yeah. Or you should.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think another thing is that the jobs created thing, it really is it's a lagging indicator. You know, I mean, I think it's been around for a long time because it's a sign that a business is growing. If you're able to afford to add jobs, then the business must be growing and people in the community are employed. All of that is really, really important. But it doesn't answer the question of, especially if you're getting into this sort of the ecosystem space, which is how are we making our city an amazing place to start and grow a business? Not how are we going out and just grabbing a big wad of jobs and then bringing them back here. The jobs created never answers the question of what was happening 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years ago that created this really vibrant business community.
And communities know now. I mean, part of ecosystem development is making sure that you're having equitable growth and everybody is participating in the upside of that growth. Again, it's one thing to say you're adding 25,000 jobs and you have 7% unemployment, but are you adding 25,000 jobs to those areas and sections of town that have historically had 20 and 30 and 40% unemployment? And that's different. And again, historically, economic development directors, cities were able to come out and just splash this big number and it sounds good, but people are really now dissecting that and looking at like, who are those jobs going to? Who's going to benefit from them? Like, again, are they high paying jobs and it's going to now turn New York into the Bay where it's going to move everybody out? Are they going to be local jobs? Clearly not. And so I think no matter what side of it you're on, whether you think it's right or wrong, I definitely think it shows that it's a new day and how cities, municipalities, the business sector, and companies have to work together and really look at the whole system or the ecosystem of the communities that they want to go into.
Yeah. So we're in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a mid-sized Midwestern city. We have relationships with a lot of people that do the kind of work we're doing over in Detroit. Detroit, obviously, there's a city that was built for 2.1 million people. It now has about 600,000. So there's a huge surplus of everything over there. It's an amazing city. But I mean, at Amazon. And I think in the right context, it can be transformative for the city. Right. I mean, New York's a very different story where it's like, okay, so, you're going to just inject these 25,000 people into, one of the last places we can afford to live.
And it just goes to the tone deaf of the whole conversation. We have one side talking jobs created and you had the other side talking about subway times.
Right.
And clearly the private sector just didn't listen and didn't understand. But yeah, I think this is more of a failure of vision and policy and approach more than anything else.
Well, and also what I've been surprised is a couple of the quotes that have come out from people in the New York tech community have been more on the, oh my God, what idiots that politicians are that they have pushed back on this enormous gift to our community. I don't know. I mean,
Gift to whose community? In
Grand Rapids, in our tech community, we have a situation in which our tech startups have employees, technologists, coders that get recruited to telecommute to a Silicon Valley company for way more than what our startup can afford. And you're basically creating almost like this gigantic vacuum cleaner of all the talent that exists in New York to pull out of what could be, what is a really vibrant tech startup community and offer insane packages. I just don't feel like it was really thought through as far as, I think for Amazon, it was thought through as far as how much is it going to benefit our business, but not thought through necessarily. I mean, if the same thing happened here, it would be a question. I think, the systems level question is, what would happen to a tech startup community if Amazon did drop its HQ right in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and none of our startups could afford to keep up with the salaries that Amazon can?
But and we always say in ecosystem advocacy is part of the work, and advocacy just meaning changing some shit that's not working. But just think how amazing it would be before municipalities gave tax breaks or abatements because you're going to create X jobs. They just ask that next question: is jobs for who?
Yeah.
And then just think if they actually had a strategy to say, we're actually going to reduce unemployment to this segment of people or to this neighborhood. And now you start tying these abatements and you do system alignment or ecosystem. So again, I think it's looking at economic development monolithically as landing a big company, tax abatements, jobs added. It's just not a healthy way to grow the entire ecosystem, but definitely a great way for individual sectors or individuals. But
you're also hitting on something that I think is really like if somebody was taking notes, it's like another key point in ecosystem building is looking at the assets that exist and how are they aligned, how are they not aligned. A great example would be starting with the question, jobs for who? Okay, what are the assets in the community that can actually be aligned toward creating that pipeline of jobs that are homegrown here, not imported from somewhere. It's not about just make the city, Austin, Texas, the last I heard, it was something like 130 people are moving there a day. Wow. That sounds, right? There's certain people that would hear that and they'd say, well, that sounds amazing. But I don't think the people who have called Austin, or many of them who have called Austin home for the past 20, 40, 50, 100 years are terribly excited about 130 people moving in a day. But to align the assets that exist in the community toward how are the jobs that are going to come in going to be filled here, and in a 2, 3, 4 year strategy.
Yeah, what are the local businesses that can be created or helped with such a move or harmed? I mean,
maybe the goal is not like it's reframing the question: is it 25,000 jobs here, or is it 2,000 jobs? That will be filled by people who currently have an address and and starting to get into some of those nuances. I feel like we're talking a lot about jobs and not about and the other thing, which is just wealth creation versus job creation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, are they all entry-level jobs? Which again can solve an unemployment issue, but if you're getting to real equity, which is about wealth creation, it doesn't do that. And again, there's no silver bullet, right? So again, it's the ability to have all these silver buckshots, right, and working together. So you might have a strategy that's simply around employment and entry level, and you might have another strategy that's about small business creation and equity. But ultimately, I think good ecosystem development is really about wealth creation and making sure access to wealth creation is equitable, especially through the entrepreneurial space.
And it is kind of interesting to think about that Amazon dynamic through the lens of what would that do. Now, some people would say, well, you would get this huge boom of like, well, where are they going to eat lunch?
Right.
Where are they going to get their haircut? Who's going to babysit their kids? Notice we didn't say we're going to have these, native people who live in our city building massive tech company.
Right.
Now you might be getting like sort of like the tier 1 and the tier 2 providers that can. And I'm not saying it couldn't be a huge economic boon, but I think that it's not. It certainly isn't like the bullseye for growing businesses, and by growing businesses, growing wealth.
Right.
In conclusion,
bottom line is,
yeah, the Amazon thing. It's such a. It was so many people thought it was such a slam dunk, only to find out. It's that signal. Like, we need to be looking at things at more of a systems level, and I think, and we find it locally. I think there's probably a lot of people, if they're working in this space, deal with it wherever they are. So much of the friction that we run into is just the way of thinking. I think at a minimum, it'll now force cities to explain to constituents why. You know what I mean? For the benefit of who, and what are we getting out of this, and how is it tied to other things? So I see that as progress. So again, no matter where you're at on either side of the Amazon, I think it's a great opportunity for people to learn. Because the failure to open was a catastrophic collision between the type of jobs, the paying jobs, transportation, access to income, mobility, quality of life. It was ecosystem building. And again, it just shows you that communities and real people every day are looking at things like that. And I think it's time for us in the sector to catch up and start taking that system level lens also. Yeah. Well, and I think well, not us, them, because we do it. And it's, and in some ways it's pretty insulting, to have a $3 billion, just the number, $3 billion, and to have to ask the question, and how much last year went into your local businesses? Right. How much went into your local tech community? How much went into your bricks and mortar, your services? Just what was the break that everybody who is actually currently delivering on your economic well-being? Right. And I think that is, I think, fundamental, is reframing the question around it. It's so easy to ignore what's in your own backyard, and be honest that landing a big fish like that is an economic development strategy, right? I mean, I just think that it's just there needs to be more. Yeah, well, and I just think the strategy didn't align with what the community wanted. Yeah, and again, I think that's the learning in it is. You can have a lot of economic development policies or strategies, but they have to align with the goals of the community and what you want. And we just saw that this time it didn't. This is clearly the community didn't want trickle down. And I think that how you want it. As much as I think as Star Garden is that we didn't see ourselves in the work of advocacy, and in some ways tried to avoid the work of advocacy. I think on our own. With our own situations, which we can go into at a future time that we've found ourselves in, we just keep finding that if the voice of the entrepreneur is not at the table, these economic development policies and rules and practices and budgets and allocations, they not only don't make it into something that supports entrepreneurship, but oftentimes are like squashing it. Inadvertently, thinking that they're doing a great job, squashing the businesses that you can grow at home or that are trying to grow here. Right. Yeah. And again, what better strategy? I mean, if this had been a coordinated effort, and if the people at the table would have asked those next level questions, what a great strategy to use an investment such as Amazon coming into town around a local business startup strategy, job creation strategy, and so forth. Tech, talent development. And I think there was some of that. And if that's what it was, shame on them for thinking that they could just communicate it as 25,000 jobs coming to town and be happy. Because it's very possible. I mean, it's very possible that there was a lot of that background activity happening. And it's possible that there was a lot of organizations that were coming together and were aligning to deliver, to increase the talent that was already there, to better, serve entrepreneurs. And that wasn't the lead story because they thought the lead story was just the jobs.
Yeah. And speaking from experience, and again, coming from even Grand Rapids, Michigan, who competed or put an application into Amazon, we know damn well that there was not one meeting held with entrepreneurs saying, what are the benefits of an Amazon coming, and how can, if they enter the market, how can we all benefit from that, and how can we, attain these goals from that? So the lack of goals, lack of strategy, lack of connectivity, it just doesn't work anymore. You have to look at these things. You have to look at the interconnectedness of these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Hence why we exist.
Right.